Can you imagine being sent to prison for off-roading your Subaru? Last month, the National Park Service released a statement announcing that they're going to be cracking down on all-wheel drive vehicles found on four-wheel drive high-clearance trails. But what really is the difference between all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive? Which one do you need for off-road driving? And why on earth are they picking on the Subaru guys? All that and much more coming up next. What's going on, guys? Matt McAdam here, aka Desert Chief, only on Driving Lines Chasing Dust. If you're new to this channel, welcome. We do a lot of great automotive content here, and if you're new to this show, it is all about off-roading. I am an off-road enthusiast through and through, and I love making content for you guys about a wide range of off-road topics. So on this episode, we're going to be talking all about the new announcement from the National Park Service regarding all-wheel drive vehicles being driven on high-clearance four-wheel drive trails. I'm also going to show you the differences between an all-wheel drive and a four-wheel drive, and why it's important to know the difference when choosing a vehicle to go do your off-road adventuring in. So the whole conversation about all-wheel drive vehicles on off-road trails started out with a Reddit post back in August from a user who received a letter from the National Park Service after a recent visit to Canyonlands National Park. The letter outlined that the National Park Service had spotted his vehicle with his license plate on a trail that was designated as a high-clearance four-wheel drive trail. The letter then goes on to note the specific violation titled under closures and public use limits. This regulation states that violating a closure, designation, use or activity restriction or condition, schedule of visiting hours, or public use limit is prohibited. And then it goes on to list a couple of trails within Canyonlands National Park. It's important to note that the user drives an orange Subaru Crosstrek. This is an all-wheel drive CUV or crossover utility vehicle, typically smaller than a full-size SUV, and it definitely does not have a selectable four-wheel drive system. Now, just a couple of days after this story broke, all the automotive news outlets picked it up and then started the debate about all-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive vehicles within national park off-road trails and then greater off-road trails in general. So that's really what sparked this video for me, is I wanted to give you guys my rundown of the differences between all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive and why you might want one versus the other. So I guess the question here is, why now? Why is this just now coming out from the National Park Service? Well, I have a theory. Towards the end of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, people started to realize that they can't pack up their families and jump on a plane and go to Hawaii for vacation. So what were people doing? They were going outdoors. Camping was still open. In fact, it saw the biggest boom it's ever seen. All of a sudden, you have all kinds of people who never were really outdoorsy people now becoming very interested in going out and adventuring in the great open lands that we have here in the United States. I imagine this was the case all over the world too, but being here in the US, I noticed that there was just a big boom within the off-road and overlanding scene. And it was coming from people who have never really done this stuff before. Now, that on its own is not a bad thing. I'm actually very happy that a lot of other people found this hobby that I happen to love so much. But it did create some problems, especially here with the National Park Service. A lot of these people thought that they could take an all-wheel drive vehicle that they just bought and they put a rooftop tent on it, they loaded up the back with a fridge and all kinds of different camping gear. They thought they could take it to a national park and go find some dirt roads and just start driving around on them because, well, hey, they have an all-wheel drive SUV that they can do that with now. But this lack of education and understanding about how all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive systems work is what's landed a lot of people in a lot of trouble. With much more people out there on the trails driving around maybe for their first time, there's bound to be a lot of problems. There's bound to be a lot of people getting stuck, a lot of people going down trails that they shouldn't be going down, and a lot of recovery efforts to get those vehicles and those people out of harm's way, off of those trails and back home safe. It's important to note that all-wheel drive vehicles are not being prohibited from all dirt roads in national parks. It's actually just the ones that have the designated signage that say four-wheel drive high clearance required. So equally as important to knowing how your car works, it's important to read the signage at the trailhead to see, does my vehicle fit the description of this sign and what I need to actually make it through this trail. A lot of people were just driving right by them, getting stuck, putting themselves in danger, putting others in danger to not be able to get around them on these trails, and then having to find a way to get their vehicle recovered off of that trail so that they can get home. Well, that seemed to have gotten the attention of the National Park Service, and that's why they're sending these letters out with a pretty stark warning. So not only are they sending you this letter, but they're also stating in the bottom of this letter that it is a violation that is punishable by up to a $5,000 fine or 6 months imprisonment. And it can even get worse for repeat offenders. So National Park Service is saying here, like, hey, you guys need to stay off of these trails. There's too many problems. There are too many people getting stuck. People are getting hurt, and it's going to be very dangerous if this continues to go on. And so what that told me was that there's a lot of people out there on the trails that may not know the differences between an all-wheel drive and a four-wheel drive. Now, I happen to believe that this is a distinction that's incredibly important when it comes to considering what kind of vehicle you want to take out on what kind of off-road trails. So let's dive right into this. What actually is an all-wheel drive vehicle? If you ever see the letters AWD, that's what we're talking about here, all-wheel drive. It is a drivetrain system that is primarily made for on-road use with some light off-road capability. And so how an all-wheel drive works is you have a basic powertrain setup like an engine and a transmission like every car has. Now behind your transmission, you usually have what's called a transfer case or a center differential. And the purpose of that piece of hardware is to distribute the power from your engine to all four of the wheels. But the key differentiator here is that it's always turning those four wheels on your car. Now this is a massive improvement over just a rear wheel drive or a front wheel drive vehicle, which only powers one axle. This is much better to have if you're on slippery road conditions, whether it's snow or ice or rain. It gives you that extra traction and handling for those roads that are a little bit slipperier or in areas where there's less traction, like a light dirt trail. However, the power that's being distributed to those four wheels isn't always the same. They're not at the same rate. Center differential really does dictate how much power goes to which axle and which wheel. Now, the great benefit of an all-wheel drive system is that there's no user input necessary. You're not switching any knobs on the dashboard. You're not shifting any levers. There's never a button to push. It's basically always running all the time. Some of the most popular soft rotors or CUVs in this category have all-wheel drive, such as the Subaru Crosstrek, the Outback, the RAV4, the Honda Passport, and various other small SUVs. Now, on the other hand, we have four-wheel drive vehicles or 4x4. If you ever see a 4WD or 4x4 badge on a vehicle, that typically means that it has a four-wheel drive system, not an all-wheel drive. And this drivetrain setup is made for the more serious off-road driver. Now here's how a four-wheel drive system works. You have your same engine and your transmission. Right behind that, you have an actual full-blown transfer case. Most transfer cases have two speeds to them. They have a high range and they have a low range. A lot of the larger SUVs and pickup trucks utilize a selectable four-wheel drive system. Being that it's selectable, that means that the driver actually has to engage four-wheel drive. So typically when you're driving around on paved roads and the highways, you're driving around in just rear-wheel drive. But when you actually need to use four-wheel drive, you have to shift it into four-wheel drive. And that's what the transfer case allows you to do. Usually it's a knob on the dashboard, or it's a lever if it's an older vehicle, or a Jeep Wrangler still uses a lever. And that's what actually shifts the car from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive. And furthermore, most transfer cases also have a high range and a low range to help give you a little bit more traction when you really need it. Shifting into low range will allow the RPMs to fly up a little bit higher at slower speeds to give you the extra traction to get up and over obstacles or very slick and low traction environments. And another key component here to remember is that four-wheel drive systems with transfer cases are typically more robust than an all-wheel drive drivetrain with just a center differential. They're just built for more abuse. They're built for the rigors of off-road driving, whereas the all-wheel drive vehicles are just there to give you a little bit of extra help when you're on the road. So where all-wheel drive is always on, it's a little bit weaker. It doesn't have two speeds to it like high range and low range, and it's not really built for off-road driving. It just gives you a little bit more traction whenever you need it. Four-wheel drive, fully selectable. You can pop it into four-wheel drive when you're in a situation that you need to use it. You can pull it right out when you get onto pavement again. It's more robust. It's built for off-road driving, and it's got a high and a low range. And one thing to keep in mind is that you'll typically find all-wheel drive systems on smaller cars, vehicles with lower ground clearance, those that aren't really made for off-road driving or being marketed as such. And on the other side, you have four-wheel drive, which is typically going to be on, like I said, pickup trucks, Jeep Wranglers, Gladiators, Broncos, Land Rover, and the Toyota Tacoma and 4Runner. So now that you know how the two different drivetrain setups work and on what different types of vehicles you'll find them on, maybe you're asking yourself if you need all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive for your adventures. Now, I don't want you guys to get confused. You can take an all-wheel drive vehicle down a dirt road. you can do some light off-roading with it. In fact, all-wheel drive vehicles are great for adventuring along fire roads, gravel roads, some moderate inclines, and that's what makes them a great option for people who like to go out into the outdoors and do other activities such as mountain biking, kayaking, etc. Basically everything you see in a Subaru commercial. So here are some things that you can't really do with an all-wheel drive vehicle. You can't be driving through mud, you can't be driving through any deep snow, you can't be driving on sand, you're not going to be doing any rock crawling, you can't be going up any steep inclines or doing any kind of like a water crossing. If those are the kinds of trails that you would like to do with the vehicle, I would suggest that you go after a four-wheel drive, because typically it's going to have the better ground clearance, it's going to have the robustness of the drivetrain, and you'll be able to make use of the low range inside the transfer case of a dedicated four-wheel drive system. So if you currently own an all-wheel drive vehicle, or you're considering buying an all-wheel drive vehicle for off-road adventuring, I want you to consider what kind of trails you actually want to do with this vehicle, or what are some of the goals that you have and places that you want to visit. If it's a trail that you typically will see a Ford Bronco or a Jeep Wrangler or a Tacoma or 4Runner or that sort of vehicle driving on, chances are that it requires high clearance and four-wheel drive. If you live in a particularly wet environment, like let's say the Pacific Northwest, 6 months out of the year, it's going to be too muddy and too wet for you to actually go anywhere off-road. I know that Canyonlands National Park in Utah is what is being referenced in this letter. If you want to go do some of those trails out in Moab or in Canyonlands, a lot of those trails require four-wheel drive and high clearance. So it's really important to be methodical if you're owning one of these vehicles or you're looking at buying one of them, to just really know before you go what kind of trails you can do with this kind of vehicle. And if you're an all-wheel drive owner and you still want to get out there and have some fun, by all means, go have a blast. There are a ton of places in the United States that you can take an all-wheel drive vehicle off the pavement and have a lot of fun. But a few things to consider is just stick to well-maintained trails. You don't want to go on anything that doesn't look like a lot of people have been driving on it. You want to make sure that if you come across an obstacle that looks too hard, this is what we call a gatekeeper when it comes to off-roading. Don't go past it, even if you can make it over it. Typically, that just tells you that the trail is going to just keep getting worse and worse as you go along. You want to avoid any kind of deep mud. If there's a pool of mud in the middle of the trail, go around it as best as you can. Go around large rocks. If there's tree roots or logs, you want to be careful of those, not to get hung up on any of them. But above all, you guys, just use common sense. If you feel like the trail that you're on is punching a little above your weight, just dial it back. There's no shame in turning around. It actually ends up being a lot safer for everybody. I really hope this video helps you guys learn some of the basic differences between a four-wheel drive and an all-wheel drive vehicle, and to really consider what kind of vehicle would best suit your needs depending on the kinds of adventures you want to go on. If you're a new off-roader, welcome to the party. This is the best thing ever. I have yet to find a hobby that's more fulfilling or more fun than getting out there in a vehicle and exploring places that most cars can't get to. If you guys have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. I'd be happy to help explain some of these things we talked about in this video. And of course, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, because Driving Line creates all kinds of great automotive content for you guys out there, no matter what kind of cars you're into. But if you like this show, this is the only place you're going to find it from now on. So if you're subscribed, you won't miss any episodes of Chasing Dust. But once again, this has been your host, Matt McAdam, aka Desert Chief, only on Driving Line's Chasing Dust. And as always, you guys, I'll catch you on the next one. Hey guys, thanks for watching. This is Matt from Chasing Dust. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, because Driving Line's creating all kinds of awesome content for gearheads just like you. I'll see you guys out there.